Hi, I am Anna Martin, and this is the Flex Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about assessing your diet for your protein intake and how you can make practical steps to improve it. So, why are we so bothered about protein? Like everyone's harping on about it. What's the deal? Now, caveat, if you've got any kidney issues, don't go any further. Check with your GP or your consultant and you can work out what it is that you need. But for the vast majority of people, we need to think about our protein intake in order to maintain a healthy amount of muscle mass. Now, especially as we age, our muscle mass decreases, and we want to give it a fighting chance so we can keep it for as long as possible, and also so that we feel strong, mobile, all of these things as we get older. We want to be able to get out of the chair. It's nice to have muscles to be able to do that. We don't want to have to like grab onto people to get us up. We want to keep moving. And likewise with any kind of fitness goal, like if you want to get fitter, stronger, maybe you want to lose some body fat, your high protein is going to be what it comes down to in terms of conserving your muscle tissue or building on the muscle tissue that you've already got. So we are living longer than we ever have before as a species. So it only makes sense that we're going to need to look after ourselves at an older age. So therefore, we might need to think about making some changes in our life that's going to help to facilitate that. And our protein intake and obviously exercise and so on is one of those things. The going through the menopause as well, our protein intake is especially important because obviously for us women, it's a massive change in our hormones. It can have a huge change on the amount of muscle mass that we have and therefore on our bone density and so on. So we want to be able to keep that muscle mass, so we must do something about it to make that happen. People going through who are perimenopausal or menopausal, postmenopausal at the time of life that we're at right now, so 2025, are probably one of the least likely groups to be performing resistance training and or eating high protein, purely because it wasn't something that was a thing when we were younger. So it isn't something that we ever were educated on as part of a healthy diet. It was all about being balanced and so on. But for the most part, women in our age bracket were pushed on low calorie diets. So it didn't really ever come into it about what was in that low calorie diet in terms of we should be eating protein or whatever. It was just cut your calories. So I know that these days, if you're listening to this as a younger person than me, you're probably seeing a lot of things about girls in the gym and people training and what they eat and so on. And it's a lot more a focus on having a high protein intake and lifting weights. But when I was younger, that wasn't even a thing. There wasn't social media for a start. There wasn't even Google for a start. All we had were 5 top tips in some shit magazine on how to starve ourselves, like the celebrities were doing. So there was a lot of differing advice on nutrition that we had. So people of my age and older are probably slightly more likely to have that in their head in terms of that's what eating healthily is. And in terms of exercise, we were much more cardio bunnies rather than looking for that all over sort of health and fitness. So, protein, if you eat meat and fish and animal products, that's basically where you're going to get the kind of purest form of protein in terms of the easiest to one kind of plan into your diet and two to get the most available protein in per kind of item. So if you're eating meat and fish for the most part, especially lean sources like chicken breast and white fish and shellfish and so on, they are almost all just protein and water, basically, in terms of when you're looking at like your macronutrient content. Obviously, this is much more challenging if one, you're trying to maybe eat slightly less meat or you're a vegan, plant-based diet, that does become more challenging. And obviously, if you're perhaps slightly fussier when it comes to your food, again, that's going to change perhaps what you'd be choosing as your protein source. So there are other ways to get it in. Obviously, there's some quite good carbohydrates that have a higher source of protein, like beans and lentils and chickpeas and stuff. So they have slightly more protein in than something like a potato, for example. So they can really help with topping it up, and they can also help for the plant-based crew in terms of getting that in. If you are vegan or particularly fussy, I would probably say it's decent it's a decent idea to have a look at protein powder, because you are going to need a little bit of help to get your protein intake up there. So a lot of people are like, oh, but is protein powder cheating? No, it's not. It's still pretty natural in terms of the product itself, and it can really help you, especially when you're trying to kind of not eat half a cow for lunch and so on. Not that you need to eat half a cow, but you know what I mean. And also we want to be aware of some other things that do have protein in. So for example, cheese does have protein in, but most cheeses are also quite high in fat, same as most dairy products. So it's not just protein, there's more fat in there than cheese for the most part, unless you're having something like low fat mozzarella, or maybe if you're a yogurt person, you're having like low fat Greek yogurt or protein yogurts and so on, because those will be higher in protein than your standard version of that product. So we just need to be aware of what there is out there for us and how the content of that might change depending on the version of the product that we buy. So for example, chicken breast is obviously lean protein, so it's nearly all straight up protein in there. But if you have chicken thighs, obviously it has a higher fat content. And there's nothing wrong with fat at all, but for some people who are trying to monitor their fat level, or perhaps trying to come in a calorie deficit, so perhaps they're dieting, it can be useful to know that information so that we're able to monitor how much total energy we're actually consuming. Okay, so there's protein in tons of stuff. Meat replacement products, tofu, soya, eggs, dairy products, meat, fish, obviously. Some vegetables have got higher protein in than others, so things like peas have got slightly higher protein in. You'll find protein in everything. Bread, there's some in most stuff, or a lot of things anyway, but it's just being aware of how much. And that can come down to the way that people eat as well sometimes. So for example, sometimes when I talk to people, they're like, yeah, I eat protein. I eat a lot of protein. But when we drill down to it, they're eating half a chicken breast with their lunch, and maybe breakfast is cereal with milk. So yes, there's some protein in whole milk, for example, and some in semi-skimmed as well. So skimmed, obviously, there's still some, but again, probably a little bit lower. So let's say they're having skimmed milk and a cereal for their breakfast, and they're having half a chicken breast for their lunch, and in their dinner there's maybe 7 or 8 prawns in the curry that they're cooking or something like that. So that is protein and it is in there, but it's probably not going to be enough, especially if you're weighing somewhere between about 60 to 80 kilos. It's probably not going to be quite enough protein to help you sustain your muscle mass and to help you get the most from your workouts. So it can, if you're not completely adverse to it, or you don't find it triggering, it can be helpful to track your food in some kind of app or notebook or whatever for one day, so you can get an idea of actually how much protein it is that you're eating. Because for a lot of people, when they actually track it, they might be surprised and it comes back, it says you're eating 40 grams. Now, for a non-exercising person, say you weigh 17 kilos, you're probably looking somewhere towards 70 grams a day for an adequate amount of protein. So that would be a fist-sized portion in 2 meals, basically. So if you say had a piece of salmon and a piece of chicken in that day, then all the other little bits and pieces that you're eating would push you up over that 70 grams. So that would probably be about right. But if you're exercising and lifting weights, resistance training, or trying to lose weight, for example, our protein requirements are higher because we have more demands on the muscle. And if you're trying to lose body fat, we want to retain the muscle. So therefore, we need to fuel it with more protein so we're able to retain that muscle mass. So then, for example, we would be willing to try to do 3 fist-sized portions of protein a day, which would push us up over that 100 grams. So for someone weighing 70 kilos, for example, getting up over 100 grams, somewhere between 100 to 140 grams of protein a day would be a pretty decent intake. So if you're coming in at 40, say 40 or 50, the first thing I would do is slowly increase it to that base amount of around kind of 1 gram per kilo, so that you're at the higher end of it. People who aren't exercising at all, often if you're coming a little bit lower than that, that's a great start. So don't stress if you're not right up there, but I would slowly increase it over that. If you're exercising and you need to get it up even higher, then you're slowly going to increase it again. We don't just want to go from 40 grams to 140 grams in a day, because you're probably going to feel that digestively. So we're going to try over time to slowly creep it up. One of the easiest things that I do to make sure I get my protein is I choose my protein source first. So, for example, I want to eat chicken. I'm going to eat this particular chicken, favourite from Marks and Spencer's, the New Yorker Flatties, amazing. So then I'm going to plan the rest of it around that. So then I pick my veggies. So maybe I want Mediterranean veg. I'm going to get, 3 or 4 different types of Mediterranean veg in there, cook them up. So then what does that go with? Probably works quite well with rice, for example, or whatever. So you can plan it back from the kind of protein that you're having. And that also works quite well at a restaurant. So if you're going out for dinner once in a month, don't think about it. Just eat whatever you want. Like if you want to eat nachos and deep fried mushrooms or something that probably don't have tons and tons and tons of protein in, because you're going out for dinner once a month, enjoy it. But if you're the kind of person that's maybe eating out or getting some kind of fast foody thing, Uber Eats or whatever, several times over a week, or you're going out maybe for lunch and a couple of dinners, you might want to make sure that you're getting your protein up, because you're trying so hard on all your other meals. So it seems a shame not to be able to do that a little bit more often. So in that case, I would again start with saying, looking at the menu and being like, well, what's got a source of protein in it that I fancy and that I know has got a decent amount in? So obviously meat and fish are easier if you eat them. And some veggie burgers are actually quite high in protein, so like Beyond Meat burgers and things, I think they've got about 16 grams in. So there are some meat replacement products that are really quite high. Obviously, things that involve like a lot of lentils and stuff, you can really get a decent bang for your buck with those as well. Things that we maybe want to think about, not in terms of just a restaurant, but also eating at home, is people might say, oh, I had an egg. I had an egg on toast. One egg is probably not going to make a huge amount of difference to your protein intake. It makes some, but it might not make a huge amount. So if you're looking to push that protein up, you're probably thinking, definitely need a couple of eggs, maybe 3. So it might be that we're trying to think, yes, I'm eating protein, but I'm not eating enough of it. Another thing, just to let you know, I've got a little cheat sheet in the comments, so you can have a little look at that if you want to. One more thing at home, if you are struggling with your protein intake, but you're eating a lot of breaded protein, so things like chicken goujons or breaded chicken, that's obviously going to have somewhat of an effect on your protein intake versus the calories. So if you are currently trying to eat lower calories, but you're eating a lot of breaded foods, that might make it a tiny bit harder for you to balance it, because what looks like a lot of protein is obviously taken up a little bit more by the bread on there, so you're already getting some carbohydrate in there, and that might be skewing what it is that you think you're getting in your meal. Don't get me wrong, I eat breaded chicken, I love it, but it's just worth thinking that potentially then we might need to manipulate some of the other food in that meal to increase our protein intake. So for example, eating a vegetable that's higher in protein, or maybe a carbohydrate that's higher in protein, like we talked about, things like beans or whatever, to push up our protein intake. Sometimes as well, some of the breaded stuff we eat, because it is higher in carbohydrate, we therefore don't need tons of other carbohydrate. So for some people, if your diet is based mainly on carbohydrates, you're the kind of person who maybe loves having pasta with garlic bread on the side, or pasta and chips, or something like that with double carbs. Again, because the volume of the food that there is makes it harder for you to hit in your protein. So I would say that it's worth just thinking, actually, does that sound like me? Do I need to rethink? And maybe I need to consider my protein source before I start thinking about the rest of the food that I want to lay on there. And I know you're going to say, it would just be so much easier if you just told me exactly what to eat. And I'm sure it would. It would be a lot easier. But one, there's so many ways to skin a cat. So we can hit our protein intake in about 400 million different ways. And of those ways, a lot of them are going to be down to your personal preference. Like I love oily fish, which is great because obviously it's good for us. But I love salmon. I'm happy to eat that twice a week. But if I put that on your plan and you didn't like it, what are you going to sub it with? You know, are you going to be able to think of something? Then it feels like maybe you're not eating on plans because you're changing it. That can be quite stressful. So actually, if you can start working out what it is that you like that shows up for you on this protein intake that's easy for you to include, that's easy for you to cook, that everyone in your family eats, that might make it a lot easier for you in the long run. Might mean you have to think more now, but in the long run, it's going to be easier for you because you will be the person that has all the knowledge rather than me giving you a list of stuff that you need to eat. And that's the thing, if we can learn what works for us, what we can easily fit in our life, and also had to eyeball it. Like after a while, you'd just be like, that's enough protein for me. That's great. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to put this if this. This is one of my favourite meals done. And then you know that you're going to be excited about that meal, that you're looking forward to it. Whereas if I give you some dog shit plan with chicken, broccoli, and rice on it, how many days before you get bored of that and you cannot wait to not eat it again? So if you actually instead make your own meal choices, maybe ahead of time if it works better for you, but so that you can easily put together your own meals, that is way better in the long run. How much protein you need depends on a lot of things in terms of your goals, your current muscle mass, the amount of exercise you're doing, um, lots of different things. So one of the easiest ways to do is think about that fist size portion, because if you're suddenly looking to build loads of muscle mass, you probably need to eat a lot more. Like if you're a bodybuilder, you probably need to eat a lot more than the amount of protein that I'm talking about. However, we're just talking about people who are not eating enough that need to gradually push it up there. So when you're laying out your plate, think about your protein source first, then your fruit and veg, or just veg, whatever it is that you're having with that meal, because that makes the plate look a lot fuller as well, which can be very helpful, especially if you're trying to lose some body fat and so on, because you want to have a really nice, nutritious plate. Of course you do, but also it's nice for the eyeball to see a lot of food on a plate. And your carbohydrate intake tends to be, for most people, the least important. So, um, unless you're vegan, obviously, because then you need to manipulate the carbohydrate source potentially to increase your overall protein intake. But for people who are eating meat and fish, probably it's kind of the less important in terms of the nutritional value on the plate. And so we can top that up with anything that we want that fits in with our meal and that makes us feel happy and full. Carbohydrates are important because it can make us feel like we're having a really nice meal, well rounded, still very healthy, very balanced. I eat a lot of carbohydrate, by the way, so I'm not demonizing it. But in terms of we're trying to increase our protein intake and therefore what should we prioritize? I would say protein and your vegetable intake, because they are the things that really are probably going to give you the most amount of bang for your buck in terms of nutrients overall. And carbohydrates are great, obviously can be great for fiber and so on, so we do need to include them. But for a lot of us, it's kind of interchangeable, right? Whether we have rice, pasta, potatoes, bread, blah, blah, blah. We probably like most of them because most people do. It's the other things that are maybe a little bit harder for people to manage. Okay, I am coming in at 20 minutes. This is unheard of. I think I'm doing really well at the moment. If you ever have any issues or thoughts or questions about your protein intake, I know it can feel quite overwhelming to start with. Um, I just to reassure everyone, I do have protein powder. I have it in my breakfast every morning. That's the only protein replacement product that I have during the day. So I would have that with my breakfast. Then I would have meat or fish or veggie source of protein in the other two meals. If I have a veggie source, then I usually choose to have my carbohydrate source as a higher protein carbohydrate, like lentils or beans, chickpeas, something, so that I can push that up. Sometimes if I'm having a meat replacement product, I'll also include cheese, which obviously if you're vegan is not helpful to you at all, but that can help to push up your protein intake. Low fat mozzarella is very high in protein for a cheese. Then you've got things like protein yogurts and so on. So I eat those quite a lot to try to make sure that I'm getting a well-rounded diet while still getting my protein intake up. So they would be like kind of my top tips. But do message me if you ever have any questions. My website's annamartinfitness.co.uk. We talk about this a lot on Flex, so you know where that is if you need it. But do always feel that you can reach out on Instagram and Facebook as well. Happy to talk about it. Okay, I'm going to shut up. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you very soon.